question. When I was a sophomore in college, I was taking a sociology class, and the professor said, I'll give extra credit for anyone who does an internship in Cabrini Green. And I didn't know what Cabrini Green was. It turned out it was a housing project in Chicago that was notorious for, violence and so, but I heard extra credit, and so I raised my hand and I said, I'll do it. And I came from a very small town in northern Minnesota, so suddenly I'm in the midst of this housing project in Chicago, and I just loved it. I was totally fascinated. I met some folks there. They were from small town Mississippi. I was from small town Minnesota. I thought, this is the best. I don't know what it was about the experience, but I made friends with this woman, Sonia Grant, and her daughter April, and her boyfriend Kevin, and got to know them. And one thing led to another. And when I was graduating, I met with the professors in my department to defend my senior thesis. And they said it would be a real shame if you didn't go to graduate school. And I'm like, really? So I kind of ignored that. I went to work as a very junior social worker. And after 11 months, I applied to graduate school because it's actually really hard doing direct service. So that's kind of how it happened. Yeah, so that's my 7th book. I've written 8 books, so I was updating my, professors call their resumes CVs. I was updating my CV recently. I'm like, I've written 8 books. I didn't realize that I'd written 8 books. So each book is really special. This book is the only book that I've written that really follows 8 families over a very long period of time. And usually I study much larger groups of people, still using the ethnographic method, still talking to people about their lives. But this was a very special book. Got to know the families super well, and it changes you. Once you begin to form real relationships with people that you kind of extend beyond the research. So this was a very intense book to write. I mean, I've written about poverty for 30 years, actually, not just 2 decades, but this one got to me. Studying people who are at the very, very bottom of the poverty pyramid, so to speak, really was very kind of soul-searing. So it's always odd, when I come to places like NC State and I'm talking about the work, I was raised in a small town, and I'm a smiler, and people sometimes say, you're telling these stories and then you smile, and I don't know what to do with that. So I don't know. It's very, very special to be able to put on paper and to give voice to someone else's story. So writing is it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a permanent record, right? It's a permanent record of someone's lived experience. Yeah, so man, I can think of so many, which to pick. I can think of one. This was after, this is really after the book had gone to press. And you may remember in the book that Madonna Harris, the only way she can get her storage locker bill paid is by sort of persisting in this fairly abusive relationship with this friend who pays for her cell phone bill and keeps the stuff in storage, like her daughter's baby book, and these precious family heirlooms from just landing on the street, because they can only have 2 bags of possessions in the homeless shelter where they're living. And, I just remember right before Christmas, here's Madonna and Brianna. At this point, they've been kicked out of the homeless shelter, so they're actually living with this friend. And he starts looking the wrong way at Madonna's daughter. And Madonna objects, it's just like, you can't, this can't happen. And he literally throws their possessions out of the window of a second floor walk up in Chicago. This is like December 14th or 15th, something like that. And it kicks the 2 out in the middle of the night. And, you get this phone call. And I'm, in Boston, right? Because I've been in Chicago this summer, and then I've gone back to my job. And just thinking of this homeless family in the context of the Christmas story was, definitely impactful. And then working through the process of finding shelter for this little family. There are not a lot of warm, friendly options for families like that. I'm not a social worker. I don't. Yeah. I'm not actually trained. I was a junior social worker, but I don't have a degree in social work. I don't know. I think it's a good caution that you can give a lot in these settings, but you should stick with your training. And so what I am is I'm a storyteller and a listener, and people really find a lot of, it's incredible how much power people take from having their stories heard and having a chance to give voice to their experiences. You'd think it would be debilitating for them, but it's empowering. So people love the experience of someone just sitting and just listening. And I think sometimes my students will say, well, what can we do? What can we do? And I'm like, bearing witness and just allowing someone to have their story heard is doing something. And actually, there's research showing that having your story heard and being heard by someone who's a neutral or sympathetic listener is powerful in and of itself. In Chicago, I had gone to graduate school there, and so knew several different social service agencies, and so my contacts there led me to several women like Madonna who were living in shelters across the city. But we also hired a college senior who had grown up in Chicago and had gone to local high school. And he worked through his senior year yearbook and began to identify families for us that qualified as $2 a day poor. And it was, the striking thing was how many of his classmates he found that, it's sad to say, who had experienced this. And then at the end of his time as our intern, it turned out that his mother-in-law was actually in this situation, and she was an amazing, she's not in the book, but she was just an amazing person. The perseverance and joy she found in life despite this almost impossible situation she was in. So that was Chicago. In Cleveland, we had another study in the field we were knocking on doors, a random sample of householders in Cleveland, and every time someone turned up that met the criteria, they ended up in our study. In Tennessee, we hired a folklorist, a woman who was very close to being $2 a day poor herself, a writer who literally scoured the back roads and trailer parks and plasma centers of this little Tennessee town. She was really wonderful. And then in the Mississippi Delta, we worked with a group of teachers who had come to Mississippi through Teach for America and had then decided to not just stay for a couple of years, but to really devote a decade of their lives to supporting Mississippi families. And so we're very lucky that they, just gleaned this amazing trust among the residents of these little Delta towns. So we could never have done the study of the Delta without that, because it would have taken us years just to make those contacts. Data are tricky, and one of the reasons you go to college is to learn about all the things we don't actually know that we think we know. So you would think that if you have a government survey that's re-administered every year over a 2-decade period, that you could simply look at the numbers and tell a story. But it turns out that, and maybe you all know this because you probably do this, people are less and less willing to answer surveys. And the cell phone has been part of the problem, because cell phones aren't linked to addresses and so on. But because of this problem, if you want to look at a trend in a survey, you've got to take into account the fact that your response rate is going down over time. You can get the story wrong. So there's this very cool tool developed by the Urban Institute in Washington. It's called TRIM. And what it does is it takes these trends, for certain government surveys, it takes these trends and it essentially accounts for that problem. So that's how we find that in the current population survey, the CPS, one of our main government surveys, that's how we find this 7-fold rise in the number of families with children experiencing $2 a day poverty for a whole year. So if you don't correct for that problem and you just look at a snapshot, let's say in the survey of income and program participation, which is the month, it sort of follows families month by month, you get a doubling of $2 a day poverty. But when you adjust for this underreporting, it's called underreporting, you'd think you'd wipe out the trend, but instead the trend exacerbated. It got bigger because there were so many more benefits to underreport at the beginning of the series than at the end, with hardly anybody getting benefits at the end of the series. The underreporting didn't matter as much, even though it went up over time. So complicated story, but I think a real cautionary tale about the use of surveys and the level of expertise you have to especially when you want to understand trends. So we had a group of critics who said, if Edin and Schaefer just adjust for underreporting, this story is going to go away. And we were like, okay, well, let's see. Because, as social scientists, we're not like advocating a story, right? If we're wrong, we want to know. And one thing you're supposed to do as a social scientist is actually beat up your own explanation. You try to prove yourself wrong. So we tried to prove ourselves wrong, and instead the trend got bigger, not smaller. So a very ironic story, but one that I think led us to a deeper understanding of the problem. Really, prior to 1996, almost no child in the United States was experiencing this virtually cashless existence. All 90,000 kids, which may sound like a lot, but it's really a very, very small group of kids were experiencing this extreme deprivation. So it's a story about statistics. think it's one of my former students, Dr. Sarah Rabb at Temple University, has really been leading academic studying food insecurity and homelessness on college campuses. She's brought this startling information about the prevalence of food insecurity and homelessness among college students to the public stage. It's an issue across the country. It's an issue here at NC State. So, the great thing about her research is it reveals that, poverty is prevalent in the last place that we would think to look, and that is among our college students. We're not realizing the kind of sacrifices people are really making to go to college and to stay in college. So it benefits all of us to make sure those students succeed. So that's part of it. But yesterday I met with dozens and dozens of students who said, this was my story, and I've never been able to talk about it, and I've always felt so ashamed. So how do we bring those students into the community? How do we make sure their experiences are valorized and that they don't carry around that shame? One way to do that is to let them know they're not alone, right? And that not everything that happens in life is your fault. One thing sociologists talk a lot about is how your personal troubles are related to the public issues of the day. Yes, we have choice, we have agency, we bear responsibility for our actions, but we're still living in a context that shapes our options, often profoundly, right? So it's the intersection of those two things where I think students can find real power and hope. But also, to be honest with you, and I think a lot of college professors would say this, young people are, I think maybe now more than at other times in our history, maybe now, as much as was true in the 60s when I was just a gleam in my mother's eye, whatever, it is young people who are going to get us out of the situation we're in. We're in a situation where we're more residentially segregated than we've ever been in American history. You don't need me to sort of detail society's ills, but we're not a cohesive society, and we're not a place where things get done efficiently or fairly. So I tell every young person I meet who will listen that they should consider running for office. You can do it at the city level, state level, federal level, but every young person should consider public service. That's where the change is going to come from. Well, I think the most important thing is to form relationships with each other, right? A lot of times students who are struggling, they write to us. We had several NC State students write to us on our website yesterday. Yeah, talking about what visions for the future and their determination to change things. It was very exciting. Like right after the event, people were writing into the website and sharing their views. But forming relationships is really, really important. There's this character in the book. The one real character who's not living in $2 a day poverty is this teacher who comes to the Mississippi Delta with TFA and then stays for 10 years. We call him Mr. Patton. We have to change names to protect people's privacy. But Mr. Patton, he's this kid from an elite background. He comes to TFA on a dare from a friend. He's heading for a 6-figure consulting job when his life is diverted to the Mississippi Delta. He ends up teaching 5th graders. He takes them to Washington. It's the first time the kids have seen an elevator. They don't believe it's real. Of course, they've seen one on TV, but it's like experiencing, they can't believe it. White people talk to them with respect on the street, something they've never experienced in their little Delta towns, or rarely experienced. Instead, the young boys are often referred to as boy, at least in one of the towns, by the white shopkeepers, which is, of course, incredibly demeaning. So, but what he does, is he forms a relationship with these fifth graders, and it's amazing, right? How it changes him and how it changes the lives of these fifth graders and their families. It's not easy going, it's not easy going. So you can't expect things to change overnight. And I even find that when somebody really has no financial resources, it can be overwhelming. These relationships can feel overwhelming. But I think the most important thing you can do is just be there, be a friend, and don't get fatigued. So that would be my recommendation. I mean, obviously volunteering at the food pantry and all of that is really, really important. But I think relationships are the most important thing. And relationships are what keep you in school, right? You're much more likely to graduate on time if you connect with other students. So,
Two-part benefit.
It's a two-part benefit, right? It's impressive, honestly. I think one of the things I really like about what NC State is doing is there are both things happening, sort of that are student-led, really student-led, really thoughtfully led, but there's also action on the part of the administration. I think the fact that you can give back your guest passes in the dining hall, brilliant. I mean, what a great solution. Everybody wins. I'd make it an opt-out rather than an opt-in, right? Because we know from behavioral science that compliance will increase a lot if you do that. But otherwise, I think it's a very cool program. Just switch it to opt-out, and you'll probably get 100% compliance. I also really like what I think is most remarkable is that the university has committed itself to this theme, exploring this theme for the year. And I don't know of another place that's doing that. There probably are, but I've been to a lot of college campuses. And they may have a food hunger day, but this is impressive. I know there are also activities afoot to really address homelessness among students at NC State. So it's cool. It was a eye-opening and encouraging visit.